Hey filmmaker, my name is Kevin and this is the Filmmaker's Blog. In this video series, we've talked a lot about ISO, shutter speed, and f-stops and how they affect light and ultimately your camera exposure. In this video, we're going to take everything we've learned so far in this series and talk about the exposure triangle and how ISO, shutter speed, and f-stops affect each other. A triangle has 3 points for each camera setting: ISO, shutter speed, and f-stops. The point of this triangle is to show that if you use one camera setting to make the image brighter or darker, you can use another camera setting or any combination of the remaining two to counteract the original exposure change. If you watched the previous videos in this series, then you know how to take any camera setting and convert it into f-stops. I hope. So by using that knowledge and the exposure triangle, we can have the same exposure at different settings. For example, ISO 200 1/200 f2 is the same exposure as ISO 800 1/50 f8. Did I lose you? I think I lost one of you. One of you is completely gone, but let me reel you back in. In the first example, ISO 200 changes to ISO 800. That is an increase of 2 stops of light. A shutter speed of 1/200 changes to 1/50. That is an increase of 2 stops of light. And f2 changes to f8. That is a decrease of 4 stops of light, canceling everything out and equaling the same exposure. Now, using this concept that we just discussed, let's answer a very common question. How do I achieve a shallower depth of field without changing my exposure? Here are the starting camera settings: ISO 800, shutter 1/100, f16. First off, we need to go to the source of depth of field, which in terms of camera settings is f-stops. Let's say you decided f2.8 is the perfect amount of depth of field. By referencing the f-stop scale, we know that the photo is now 5 stops overexposed. The only way to balance the exposure back is to change the other camera settings. We can only bring ISO down to ISO 100 because that's the lowest ISO is able to go on most cameras. The change darkens the image by 3 stops. Now, the image is only 2 stops overexposed. Now let's move on to shutter speed. Changing the shutter to 1/400 takes away 2 stops of light. Now with the settings ISO 100 1/400 f2.8, we now have a shallow depth of field with the same exposure. Now we get to the hard part. What? The hard part? Didn't we just do the hard part? In photography, we can use the full extent of the exposure triangle. Change any setting you want, you're just taking a photo. But in video, there's already settings that are kind of married to a specific number, which we can't change without having consequences in our footage. So let's say I'm shooting video and I want more depth of field in my shot. Let's take a look at my settings. For most situations, to avoid digital noise, the ISO will stay at the native value. For my camera, that is ISO 800. The shutter speed will be at natural motion. Since I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, my shutter speed is set to 1/48. My f-stop is currently at f2.8, but my goal is to get more depth of field, so I change my f-stop to f5.6. This makes the image 2 stops darker than it was before. Instead of changing my ISO, which I've decided I didn't want to do, or changing my shutter speed, which would make my footage look unnatural, I have to do something else outside of my camera settings to fix my exposure. I guess you can say we're changing the exposure triangle into an exposure square if we want to, stay on shapes, because I need outside studio lighting to make this look happen. Now, even though I can't change my camera settings, it doesn't mean that the exposure triangle is useless for video. I understand what my lighting needs are. In this particular case, my lighting needs are 2 stops. I need 2 stops more light to have the same exposure. And I know this because I understand the exposure triangle. So even though I can't directly influence my image in video using the triangle, I can indirectly know what I need to do with outside lighting to make the image exactly what I want it to be. There it is, the exposure triangle and how to use it in photography and video. If you're a little fuzzy on the triangle itself, or maybe one specific camera setting that we talked about in this video, make sure to go back and watch the camera exposure playlist. I go over every single camera setting, how it affects light, grain, motion blur, and depth of field, but most importantly, how to convert ISO and shutter shutter speed into f-stops. So if you want to learn more, make sure to check out those videos or hit my online blog, or I guess a written version of the videos. If you like to read better than you like to watch, you are in the minority. Then go to thefilmmakersblog.com. There will be a link in the description. If you like the video, give it a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified when my next video comes out, even though you already know it's every Friday.